Record. Excellent. So we have Alfonso Fiore, head of product at Asia, who's calling in from Singapore today.
Hey guys. Hey.
What time is it over there as well?
It's 8:30, right? 8:30 p.m.
Yeah, it's only 6 hours different. It's not too bad. Excellent. So what we're doing is currently at Product Mastery, we're running a Product MBA program. So we're taking product managers, product owners, some aspiring entrepreneurs as well, taking them into a 6-week program where we're essentially validating an idea and taking it all the way through to generating revenue within 6 weeks. So what we've been doing every week, as well as sort of the video exercises and assignments, is bringing an expert in on anything, leadership, sales, product, etc. Anyone I think can really deliver a lot of value. And I think from our conversation a couple of months ago, I thought you'd be a great candidate, sort of impart some knowledge and leadership experience, particularly to the students. So as I said, we're gonna, I think most people are at work currently, so I'm gonna post the recording for anyone that is missing this, but everyone else can, if people will join, can ask a couple of questions as well. Excellent. So when we last spoke, I remember you mentioned that your CEO sort of took the decision to try and avoid firing team members in favor of trying to furlough and actually go for a policy of reduced salary across the business.
Correct.
Is that still happening? And if so, like what has the impact been on your culture and performance, have you felt, within maybe your teams, the organization?
So the company allowed us to choose between two options, right? Here in Asia, we had the option to choose to actually reduce our salary voluntarily, or actually go on unpaid leave, and so basically reduce the amount of time we work in exchange again for reduced salary. Because really, for Asia and for Tony, the CEO and co-founder of the company, he really believes, actually there's a quote from him that, take care of your employee first and they will take care of your customers, right? And so, yeah, this is still the case. And honestly, I don't really think that there's been any negative effect. In fact, if anything else, if anything at all, we're actually working harder because we have so much that we want to deliver, and we really want to be ready to capture the market as soon as, travel ban are lifted and people go back to travel. So I haven't seen any particular, there is some logistics, right? Because for people that have selected unpaid leave, then of course we have to maybe sometimes plan meetings in a way that, of course, the key people are in the meeting. Other than that, I haven't seen any negative impact.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I imagine that, I remember reading a case study of 2008, and I think the companies that followed that policy had a huge positive impact on sort of culture and performance.
Yeah, correct. I think especially when we look at the things that happen around us, if you think about other companies that unfortunately had to let people go, I imagine that the feeling there, it's much harder, right? Because you don't know what's going to happen next. So for us, I feel extremely lucky on both sides, right? First of all, that this is the policy of our CEO and that this is our situation at the moment. Obviously, nobody has a crystal ball, or at least I lost mine last time. I cannot find it anymore. And so it's really hard to tell what's going to happen next. And obviously, a company has to make revenues to pay salaries, right? There is no way around it, right? There is absolutely no silver bullet or no secret to this, right? Unless we make revenues, we won't be able to pay our salaries. Yeah. So there is a limit to everything, right? But for the time being, this is the situation that we're living, and I think we're all very grateful for it.
Yeah, I suppose you're, by your CEO sort of being very clear as well and communicating like where you're at, et cetera, et cetera. Right. I think you touched upon that point that I've always seen as the, just observing throughout this crisis, sort of the main mistake I can see people doing and see people being upset about when you see comments on LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever, is really around uncertainty, right? It's this, not knowing what's coming. And I think a mistake many leaders make is sort of treating their team like children in a way, right? And sort of hiding the truth. Maybe even sometimes to sort of, thinking that may be in their interest, protecting them from the fact that there's maybe no revenue, when ultimately uncertainty is going to just destroy productivity because people are worried, looking left.
Right.
rather than focusing.
So I think Tony is, at least to my knowledge, one of the most active CEOs, definitely, at least in Southeast Asia, right? Maybe not in the world, but definitely for Southeast Asia, is very active on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on Instagram. He has a lot of followers. I'm not a big social media guy myself, so I cannot really comment, but I can say that at least on LinkedIn, where I am active, I can see a lot of his comments, and as you correctly as you said, right, he clearly mentioned that 96% of our fleet of flights of airplane was grounded due to the virus, and that obviously that had very big impacts on our revenue. So yeah, it's been very transparent.
Yeah. How have you found like your role as sort of head of product? How has that changed? Like, what kinds of things do you find yourself doing now that you weren't doing before, let's say?
Well, obviously this is more about the large AirAsia organization, right? Maybe not just me personally, but obviously we had to shift our priority, right? We have to adapt to the situation. So we've done a lot of interesting things, right? So for example, as many other super apps have done, I think if you're familiar with maybe you're not, but in Southeast Asia, Grab, it's one of the major super apps here, and I'll offer transportation, food delivery, financial services, and they actually swapped their main tile in their super app from transport to food, because obviously the use case of food is now much more relevant. And that's exactly the same thing we did, right? We have our own e-commerce website, and so obviously in normal days, the flight, it's of course bringing in several multiples of revenue compared to the e-commerce, to our e-commerce website. But now we have the e-commerce as our main tile, right? And also we did other things that probably we would have done maybe later or maybe not at all, like our unlimited flights, right? We had an offer, we launched an offer back a couple of months ago to allow customers in several countries to buy unlimited pass for either domestic or international flights for their respective countries, as a way to raise money in these difficult times. So we've been very creative. We've been trying to find ways. Obviously, it's hard to say. I mean, those are obviously financial information that I'm not not even aware of, to be completely honest. But obviously, it's hard to completely replace the revenues of flights, given that we were flying to 150 destinations every single day. But obviously, we're doing all we can in order to do the best we can to survive during those periods.
Yeah, and also suppose that I think having that strong culture as well, similar again to sort of past crises, is the teams that survive and come out stronger ultimately go on to dominate. I imagine in your case, dominating like the Southeast Asian.
This is absolutely. I mean, I definitely am not qualified, and I don't want to speak for Tony, but this is definitely what Tony has been said many times before, right? Yeah. The airline started right after September 11, the attack to the Twin Towers in New York, and it survived that time. And we, before my time, they also went through SARS here in Southeast Asia, and again. In fact, that's exactly right? What you just said. Tony is a big believer of finding opportunity in this time of crisis. And he always mentioned how during those times of crisis, he actually doubled down on marketing and increased marketing spend, because, in these times, these are times where strong and lean companies can actually not only survive, but as you correctly said, thrive, right, in this time of uncertainty.
Yeah. Awesome. Sorry, I had a question. Completely forgot what I was going to ask. Oh yeah, that was it. Around how have you find, like, as head of product, managing that transition? Because I think it's very easy. It's very easy to pivot when you're in a 10-person startup.
Well, yeah.
Next day you're off in this direction. How did you manage that transition, both on sort of the practical side and also in terms of managing people and sort of expectations, motivation, etc.?
So I think that this is kind of like my go-to phrase, right? Every time I'm trying to make a point, I always say that this is the most important thing of product management, but I have 20 different things that are the most important thing of product management. But definitely the most important thing of product management for this particular sentence is driving clarity, right? And this is the one that I use probably more than others, more often than others, because I believe that in product management internally, right? Internally with all your stakeholders, being designers, being other team, other product managers, your engineering management manager, and your engineering team. So there is a lot of time where, in fact, actually, funny enough, this happened exactly. This just happened to me like literally an hour ago. I was still working with my colleagues, and I realized that there was some misunderstanding that something that we were not entirely aligned. And few people thought we were about to do something, few people thought about something else. So I think as a product manager, one thing which is, like I said, right, one of the most important things is really driving that alignment and making sure that you document as much as you can and you share with your team. And to your point about the 10 people startup, right? There is no such a thing as a product manager for a 10 people startup, right? Normally it's going to be the CEO, the founder, who's going to act as a product manager in between other 100 roles that is taking, right? Yeah. But it's still important to kind of drive that clarity, make sure that everybody is aware. And, the CEO will do it as with all ends meeting. We have our own ways, right? So this is something that we're working on a lot. We have 2 weekly meetings, one just for the product team, which is product and design, in which basically we share knowledge. We try to understand each other better. We understand where we come from, the experience we bring to the table, and also as a place to share updates and information. And then we have another weekly meeting between all the product managers and all the engineering managers to kind of discuss all the cross-functioning tasks, all the things that we need help from other teams to achieve. And those things we do, of course, through online tools, but also through communication, right? And there is nothing that replaces communication. At the end of the day, again, clarity is the most important thing. That's why with my team, I'm very strict about, if the sentence is not clear, if your friend, even though he's not a technical guy and he doesn't work in the company, but if I read your user story, if I don't get a clear sense of what is it that you're talking about, there's something wrong, right? So it's very, very important. At the end of the day, that's what product manager do, right? Product manager brings clarity to the table, try to make a clear sense of what are the priorities, and make sure that people around the table are all on the same page, because it doesn't really help. This is what I call the telephone game, right? And everybody who's been working with me, I'm sure it would know exactly what I'm talking about, right? Because I keep always saying this, right? Guys, this cannot be the telephone game, right? It cannot be that one person listens bicycle and at the end of the line, somebody else thinks that I said truck, right? So, yeah, communication and being clear it's very important. So to your point, right? When we do those changes, we just have to communicate them very clearly and make sure that we're all aligned and make sure that all priorities change. So I'm not sure if you're aware, there is this saying that in war, a plan is useless, but planning is essential. And I think this captures really a lot of the thing of a product manager, right? You have to keep planning every single time, even though you know that you will have to throw away that plan more often than not. But the act of planning will give you an understanding of what lies behind the horizon that you wouldn't have if you were not to engage in that kind of act of planning in itself.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I think it ties into my personal philosophy of product management. That is ultimately, things like processes that we use, whether we're using Scrum or however we plan things, that it's important that we have processes to get things done, but ultimately your personal ability to be able to adapt very quickly and rally a team around this new direction we're going in, like those soft skills are very powerful. Everything else can be learned, right? You can go to a Scrum certification, etc. It takes, I think, a lot of experience and also trying to really see the bigger picture to, exactly be able to adapt and sort of just go and not worry about the small things so much and really just focus on the big strategic decisions.
I think I can give you like some practical example of how this happens, right? What you just said is totally right, and I totally agree. And this is just an example of what we were just discussing, right? For the last couple of weeks, I've been driving alignment between all the major stakeholders, right? Our head of data, myself, engineering manager, the designers, our business partner. And what I've done, right, I've explicitly done it in a way to allow me, I went for the long, scenic route rather than the simple, straightforward route, because I felt that would actually help me drive clarity. So I'll give you a practical example. So now we're almost at the first milestone of our product. It took us, some time, but we're about to go live with one new product in the next few weeks, right? And so now it's time to look ahead and think about how are we going to prioritize the rest of the work we're doing, right? So I've done very simple thing, right? I took my notes. I write down every time I skip something because I don't want it in the MVP. I write it down. I keep a note, and then the simplest of thing, right? I put it down on an Excel sheet, right? And I have one line for each item. But then what I've done, right? I define a way to prioritize those things, like as in, I first group them in 3 major buckets. I call them now, soon, and later. Mm-hmm. And then even the now bucket, I split it in 4, right? P0, P1, P2, P3. And then what I've done is I sent 5 different copies to 5 different stakeholders with just the list of things, right? And I asked them to do their own priorities without looking at anyone else's. So I could really see their opinion unbiased by someone else. And then what happened was that when we put them together, all 5, that's actually where we found out that thing that I just mentioned a few minutes ago about that misalignment. Yeah. Because I was like, hey, wait a second. If you think that if everyone else sees that this is urgent, but you're telling me that this should be done later, there must be something that we don't know. And in fact, that's exactly right? And so doing that kind of long route, rather than simply saying, okay, I'm the product manager, this is my priority list, just tell me if you disagree. That would have been the lazy way. It would have taken me probably less than 20% of the time to put it together, because I didn't have to share different files. I didn't have to recombine them, create formulas in Excel, make sure all matches. I had to do a lot of extra work to make them work like this. And I actually had to spend 2 hours in meeting to go through all those items. But this was a major thing, right? And we wouldn't have catch it if we didn't go through this long process. So that's what I mean by, that's really driving alignment, right? Allowing everyone to have their voice and voice their differences. It's very important. I always say, like, it's okay to disagree with me. I will never claim that I'm always right, but you have to come to me, tell me exactly why you disagree, and tell me what am I doing wrong, and then we are aligned again.
Yeah. No, that's actually a great tactic. I haven't thought of using that before. It also ties into, I think it's a really good point by Jason Fried, one of the founders of Basecamp, and he says that communication is fundamentally a problem of miscommunication.
Yes.
And actually, the way that you've approached that's really clever, because you're uncovering is there misalignment? Because usually we focus on improving communication, but it's very difficult, without that kind of process, I suppose, to actually understand it. Where are people at with this? One thing I've used in the past is like a lightning decision jam, just a workshop format where you vote on priorities, but ultimately you don't see you don't have somebody that has an overview of like who has placed which votes, and is it, for example, the sales guys, voting over here and product over here, and therefore how can I sort of fix that problem? That's a really, really good, effective approach. Actually, I might steal that from you in future. Talk to me though, just going back a point on, you mentioned you run the product and design weekly meeting. How specifically do you structure that?
So I can tell you a little bit about that, because that's something that I actually helped change in the company in the last few months, and I think it went really well, and I'm actually quite proud of the results. So initially, what happened was that we used that almost like a scrum of scrums, if you want, or basically just a stand-up, right? A stand-up among product managers in which everyone was called upon, and they just had to have a quick update of what they were doing in that sprint in that week, right? But what happened is that, especially during the virus, right? Especially because we are apart. We never meet anymore. Like we used to meet on a weekly basis at least, right? And we just crisscross each other in the office. But basically, to me, right, because I know, because that's exactly what I did. That turned out to be almost like, you know, when you are in high school and teacher calls your name, and then for 1 minute you have to listen and say something, and then you go back to sleep or go back to your work, right? And that's exactly how everybody did it, right? You know, everybody was waiting for their time, saying a few words, and then every single time other people were speaking, they would actually do some extra work, because anyone is busy, right? So it's natural, right? It's not like we didn't care, it's just that we were all busy, right? Yeah. And so when I thought about the way to improve, I really wanted that to become the moment where we created the community of product management, right? And you can imagine, right? Of course, AirAsia is a big company, and we have, you know, a lot of product managers, a lot of designers. And so some of us never work with each other. Some of us don't know each other at all. They don't even know what the other people work on, right? Mm-hmm. And so the way I did it is to allow people to kind of share a deep dive on something that they were passionate about, either related to work or related to something else, right? And so we have a 1.5 hour each week, and we use it like in 2 blocks of 45 minutes. Mm-hmm. Somebody presents as a presentation, talks about something. We're free to interrupt. We are free to interact. In fact, actually, my meter of success is, if you don't get to your last slide, you've been a roaring success, because there's been too much talking. If you know, you get to the last slide, but you've interrupted a lot, that was actually great success. Yeah. If you went through your slides exactly as you planned, then I'm not that excited, right? Yeah. Then I would call it like a medium, because that then again means that people are not interacting, and they're doing something else, right? They're on their laptop, they're doing other work, right? Yeah. And it's amazing, because yesterday I'm the one that kind of present that and shared it and introduce people and share it with others. And I find it fascinating, because we also have guest speakers from outside the community, right? So we had the head of marketing speaking with us, the head of data. So we actually want to use it also as a way for the product community to understand better what happens around them, right? Because we are in our own bubble, but at the end of the day, we know pretty much very little about marketing, very little about operation, about flights, about other things, right? Of course, some of us obviously know much more, right? Yeah. But as you know, AirAsia has different business lines. So somebody that works with activities, for example, mm-hmm. or other things, they have no interaction with the flight operation team, right? So they wouldn't know anything about what are the complexity, yeah. what are the challenges, right? So that's something that we use that as well. And then yesterday, we actually had one of the heads of the data team to come and present. And, you know, I inadvertently, I said, oh, and he's going to tell us something about data. And he said, no. You know, when I was invited, I said I could talk about anything. So I was like, sure, why not? And he started going super deep about his bioengineering experience in analyzing viruses and analyzing. And so we start talking about the virus, yeah. and what are the challenges of analysis and fast analysis, and all the challenges of like testing antivirus versus testing the virus itself. It was super fascinating, right? And yeah. and it was amazing, because now everybody knows that this is the guy that has all this knowledge, and you kind of bring a third dimension to yourself, right? Rather than being the stupid product manager that does X, Y, Z, right? Exactly. Like you come alive, and then people start knowing you even though they don't work with you. And that's exactly the goal of that meeting. So that was for me, it was fantastic. It was a great success. And yeah. many people asked questions. We were very passionate, because of course, as a product manager, by definition, you're curious, you're interested about a lot of different things. So it was super interesting.
No, I mean but there's 2 points there that really show, I think, the difference between you as sort of a high-level head of product and, let's say, junior mid-level product manager. So like, one is, I think, understanding again that when we're dealing with, we're managing people ultimately. So understanding that, bringing that third dimension to people, and sort of bringing that, you know, who is Alfonso beyond just, you know, coming into work, is really important, right? To connect teams and really. Totally. And I think the other thing is also your point on, which is a very interesting, a huge topic to talk about. Go into a different point maybe, but around actually metrics as well. I think there is, you know, I read a great book called The Tyranny of Metrics recently, and it's about, I think, the more experience you get, the more you realize actually optimizing for the wrong metric. So for example, with getting through all of your slides, like completing the presentation is essentially irrelevant. It's engagement that really matters, and finding sort of clever ways to measure that as you have, again, is a very important skill, very difficult. How do you teach that to people? And it sort of shows, again, that sort of step up. Just turning into our last sort of like five minutes or so. Does anyone have any questions, guys, listening in? If not, I've got a few that I can cover as well. Daniel's looking thoughtful. All good? Okay, no worries. No worries, I've got a few. Excellent. So, linked to that, Alfonso, one thing I think is really important is, one issue that I see, one of the reasons why we're doing the product MBA is there is a gap that I see between junior mid-level product manager, so more on the tactical or simply like execution side of things, and that more strategic and leadership role that a head of product or CPO requires. What do you think that, the one thing that people could do if they're, say, a product ownership role or junior mid-level product manager? What's the one thing that you think they could cultivate, sort of make that step up or start, practicing those skills that you're going to require at a I don't want to say higher level, but a later stage of your career?
Oh man, this is such a good question because I don't have any good answer. So that's the mark of a great question. So I would say that this can be dissected in so many different ways, right? So I'll give it a try, but I don't promise anything particularly good in answer. So the way I think about it is definitely a major problem, right? We want everyone in the organization to be hands-on, meaning that I am not just a manager of product managers, but I'm a product manager myself. I have my teams and I write stories and I do my stand-ups, my planning, etc. Right? And that obviously requires an insane amount of time. And unfortunately, if you know oh man, now the words eludes me, but if you know that 2x2 matrix of urgent and important, right? So there are certain things that I forgot who came up with it, but it's some American statesman. And basically the idea is that oftentimes, right, we are so consumed by what's urgent that we really don't look at what's important. And that's absolutely the case, right? Even this prioritization exercise that I was mentioning like 5 minutes ago, it was something that I was dragging my feet on for quite some time because, it's very, very important, but it's not urgent. And so, and I ended up, long story short, I ended up doing it in the weekend, right? Because that's the only time where you can really focus and concentrate. Yeah. And if you listen to Marty Kagan, right, what he says is that, product management is not that easy. It's not that hard, right? You just have to have 5 hours a day of uninterrupted thinking. And most of the people start that at 6 p.m., right? And I can tell you, like, I know so many other colleagues that really, if you want to put that kind of time to concentrate, to think about the future, you cannot do it in 30-minute slots, in half an hour slots, in 1 hour slots. You really have to have this kind of block time. And normally, unfortunately, a lot of us ended up doing that at 6 p.m. in weekends. And that's the sad truth. In fact, actually, time management is definitely one thing that I would love to get much better at, right? It's definitely something that I feel, I feel like I'm cheating, right? The fact that I'm doing my work with using weekends and using evenings, it doesn't make me feel good, right? It makes me feel like I'm not very good at time management, right? Yeah. But then there is another part of it, right? I think in your question, which is equally important, right? Which is, how do you take a step back and really look at the big picture? So I don't know, for example, if you're familiar with Netflix, right? Their CEO, when they talk about competition, they say something amazing that always, like, the first time I heard it, it really, like, I had my eyes wide open. I was like, oh, that's freaking interesting. That's a guy that has a different take, right? He says, Netflix competition is not Hulu or is not TV. Netflix competition is a dinner with your girlfriend or boyfriend. Yeah. It's sleep. It's a bottle of wine. That's Netflix competition, right? So now, can you have that look, right? Think of now, to go back full circle and go back to Tony for a minute. Think about, you are the CEO of an airline, right? Which is expanding left and right, covers the entire Southeast Asia, goes all the way to China, to India, is the biggest airline in Asia outside of China, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're pretty in a good place, right? And what do you think? Well, I mean, you think you're going to expand to another country where you're not present. You think you're going to do, well, not really. What Tony did was take a step back and see the big picture and see like, hey, there is tens of millions of people that go through my flights every single day of the year, every year. And at the end of the day, how much of the pie I'm getting? Well, I mean, I'm getting, I don't know, whatever. I don't know what's the profitability of flight, but let's say $10, $20. What about all the hotels, all the activities, all the flights, right? What is the big picture out there? And that's kind of the idea of a super app, right? When you think about where can you go, where can you take a step back and look at the big picture? That's where you really, as a strategic product manager, that's where you really can bring a lot of value. When you can take a step back and see the incredible big picture. I don't know if this is actually a true fact, but I read once that back 10 or 20 years ago, the CEO of Coca-Cola apparently said, well, actually, people were asking, where are we going to go next, right? We own, I don't know, whatever numbers, 60%, 80%, 90% of soda market, right? And apparently, again, I wish to learn if that was true or not, but what I read was that the CEO said, yes, but we only own 5% of all drinking liquids in the market. And now you see this incredible shift of perspective. And now you see that you're not at the top of your game, you're just starting, right? And that's kind of the way where you really bring a difference. Now, how do you do that? I would say probably by being curious, by looking around, by listening to smart thought leader, by consuming a lot of article, books, podcasts. That's kind of like the only thing, because this is how I kind of learn to take a step back and look out, right? So the more you can learn to do that, and the more you can kind of, what I'm trying to do is always be on the lookout for very interesting thinking process, right? Processes that I'm not very familiar with. I don't know if you're familiar with the, people that kind of break the pattern. And there was a case, I think in the 1970s, of a guy that found out that basically the Hoover company started to give away free return flights to the US for people that bought a Hoover. And that kind of got so badly messed up that people started to buy Hoover just to fly cheap to the US. And then people started to give each other Hoovers for free, like at Christmas, at birthdays, because they bought them just for the flight, right? But they didn't care about the Hoover at all. They didn't want to vacuum their house. They just wanted to have a cheap flight to the US. So can you try to find those kind of, I mean, that was obviously a great failure, right? But can you try to find those people that think really differently and can help you gain a completely different perspective on the market? So the last one, and then I'll let you go. The last example that comes to mind is, I remember reading about how, back in the time of at the beginning of the iPad, right? When the iPad was launched, people were asking like, okay, isn't this something as a, couldn't this be a competition to the MacBook, and should be something that Apple actually invest in? And the answer was, actually, if I want to have, if there has to be competition to the MacBook, I'd rather have it inside Apple itself, right? Not as a third party. I want to be the one spoiling my own cake, because then at least I'll be still in control, and the market will still be with me. Versus other company where they really look after their sacred cow, they really don't want internal competition. These are all the possible ways in which you can really think outside the box, and that helps to build that strategic layout. So that's kind of my way to say a lot of things where I have nothing so important to say.
No, I was absolutely spot on. I think that's exactly what I sort of observed is, if you can really zoom out and sort of see the bigger picture and then act on that, then I mean, it's what we're trying to actually cultivate in the Prod MBA. You're trying to take a leap rather than take these tiny steps. And I think, the other good Apple example is when Steve Jobs launched the iPod, it wasn't about like having a better battery or anything. It was just like 1,000 songs in your pocket. So rather than competing against these old MP4 players, just
Yeah.
creating a whole new, blue ocean, a whole new sort of market for themselves. Awesome, though. That was really, really insightful. I've learned a lot. I'm definitely going to use your prioritization framework for communication. Thanks so much for the time, Alfonso. It was really, really helpful. And as I said, I'm going to post this to our guys. Is there anywhere where like people can follow you? LinkedIn, for example?
Yeah, I would say LinkedIn is probably the only place where I'm active, where I share some of my thoughts, where I share things that when I read that I really find interesting. Yeah, so you can just look for my name on LinkedIn and you'll find me there, and you can follow me, connect with me, and that's definitely the right place.
Perfect. I'll post the link to Alfonso's LinkedIn on the Slack community. Awesome. Thanks so much, Alfonso. That was a real pleasure. And thank you so much for the time.
Thank you for having me, Harry, and good luck, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.